Does speaking with other English language learners improve your English?
Well, yes and no.
Let's talk about it.
What's up, guys? Welcome to WaiGuo Friends English. Today we're going to finally answer a question that a lot of people ask us. How helpful are other people?
How helpful are they really? We are in a lot of English language learning circles, and we have been for a number of years now, and this question always gets brought up. Native versus non-native teachers, and how advanced does a person need to be before they can start teaching me?
Is my best friend who's taking all of my English classes with me, are they a good practice partner?
So today we're going to break down and give a prioritized list of who we think could be most helpful for your English language learning journey.
Now, of course, this is based off of our own experience and our own language learning journeys, and this is what we're seeing in our students over the years.
So number one are the people that are from your country that are around similar level of English that you are. These people tend to make the same mistakes that you do. They tend to be okay with some of the mistakes that all of you are doing. Maybe it's a common pronunciation mistake or common grammar mistake. And so it's not like they're like, oh, it's fine to make those mistakes. But a lot of times they just can't see them. They can't see the mistakes because everybody's making it. It's like a fish swimming in water.
Yeah, it's like the mistakes feel logical. So if you come from a language that doesn't have to be verbs, then the way that you ask a question or make a statement and you skip the is or was or were or something like that, if you skip that, it's going to sound okay because it doesn't trip a signal for anybody else, right? You're all making the same mistakes and it's logical, so it's difficult to catch each other in that. And instead, you might actually be bolstering those bad habits. And that's kind of a problem if you plan on reaching fluency or you plan on getting to advanced levels as quickly as possible.
As opposed to that, what if you study from a person that's from your native language and trying to study English, but they're just more advanced than you are? These people can be actually really key to helping you kind of cross over those barriers because a lot of times they've already crossed over those barriers. They've already crossed those bridges. They've already learned those lessons. So for you to be able to come up to them and they say, hey, listen, it took me a long time to correct this thing that you need to start correcting now. For them to be able to go back in their journey and kind of help you out is actually a really valuable asset.
Yeah, odds are that person understands the way that you are making mistakes. They understand what you are thinking, the way that something is pronounced, or the way that you think this sentence order should go. And so they've already worked through that. They've already corrected that problem. So if they hear you do it, chances are they're going to say, hey, I know what you're doing. That's not correct. This is how you do it instead, and here's why. That is so helpful, guys. We've had people like that help us in our own language learning journeys, and that was so helpful. It was just kind of like a shortcut to understanding something. It was so helpful. Now, there are textbooks designed to do this, and sometimes those are helpful, but sometimes those textbooks are published years ago, and things have already changed and updated in the spoken language. So be careful with textbooks that are meant to do that. You definitely don't want anything older than 10 years.
And also another thing is those advanced friends that you have in the language that you're looking to go be fluent in, a lot of times they can still be blindsided by some advanced grammatical things that shouldn't seem like they should work, but they actually do work. They may not know those things, so just watch out for that because you don't know exactly how far ahead they really are. It's very difficult to actually be able to get that on a measurable scale.
Yeah.
So just be aware that even if a person's high advanced, they still may make some mistakes because English is not their native language.
Another type of person we want to talk about are English learners that are around your level from other languages, other first languages. Now, these people are actually surprisingly helpful because they actually make different kinds of mistakes from you and they recognize or they hear your mistakes a little bit easier. So it's interesting that people from other languages that are around your level, they're actually incredibly helpful because they can bring up concepts, they can ask you questions about your language and make you think in ways that you wouldn't normally. They would come from a different line of thought, a different kind of logic than you are culturally. And so the things that you guys exchange back and forth is actually a lot deeper and a lot more interesting. Now, at first it's going to be surface level. You've got to stick with the same group for a little while before you start really getting to the meat. But once you get to that meat, they're actually incredibly helpful. We have found those individuals incredibly helpful in our own language learning journeys.
But it can be challenging because it can be hard for a person from Japan to be able to understand what this person from India is really saying. And if it's not comprehensible input, it can be difficult a little bit. But what about the people that are from another country or have a different mother tongue than you, but they're more ahead than you are? So different first language, but much, much more advanced than you are. That person is also could be a very valuable resource. However, they kind of lose some of the I've walked that road before, because a lot of the situations that they have struggled with don't necessarily impact your first language. So just watch out for that, because it can be kind of awkward when a person is like, this is a really big deal, you need to make sure that you do this, when in fact in your first language that's not actually that big of a problem.
Yeah. This is something where they just don't get necessarily the struggles exactly that you have. Now, there are some things that many English language learners of different languages struggle with English. The spelling system is one of those things. Everybody understands that that is just messed up, it's different, and there's a whole history behind that to explain why those words are spelled the way they are and why our English is as broken as it is. But those other speakers, there's going to be other things where for them, maybe they got to be verbs very easily. Maybe pronouns were incredibly simple to them, but maybe in your own language, those aren't as simple. Those are more simple in your language, so the more complex system in English doesn't make sense. The mistakes that you're making, they're not going to be able to empathize with as much unless they are already a more naturally empathetic person, right? Or maybe they've already been trained to be a teacher before or a tutor, so they can help. But there are also times where, they may not actually know, and they may be in a more direct culture. They might be a lot more strict with you and have more problems, or maybe even shame you a little bit for making such a silly mistake to them. But to you, coming from your language, that's actually not a silly mistake. That understanding goes a long way in helping one another grow in English.
So what about native speakers, right? Native speakers that speak English, they're all good teachers, right? And anybody that's a native speaker can be a good English teacher, right?
No.
Unfortunately, one of the least helpful group of native English speakers are those that have never learned another language, and they're not English teachers in the first place. So you come up to them and say, hey, I want you to be my teacher. That can be extremely difficult, not only for you as the student, but also for them as the teacher. They don't know what it's like to study another language. So for them, they're just going to kind of keep on just pouring gas onto a fire, thinking that it's going to quench the fire, when in fact it's just making it worse.
Well, even if they're not trying to be your teacher, maybe you're just asking for them to be a language partner. Then it depends on the personality. Are they patient? Are they gracious? Are they willing to catch your mistakes and talk about them? Or are they going to be perfectionist, really just telling you every single mistake you make? That's kind of important. And so at that point, it depends on your personality and theirs. What are you looking for? What are they able or capable of giving, right? And so a non-native speaker who has never learned another language can be helpful if they are a very patient person. They are not that helpful if they're not a patient person, they're not gracious, and they're like, come on, you're being stupid. Okay, if they think your intelligence is less because you're not able to communicate with them, that is not the type of person you want to be with.
As opposed to that, a native speaker who has actually learned a language before and knows the struggle and knows how difficult it can be, but maybe they're not trained teachers, can still be a valuable asset because they know the struggle, they know how difficult it can be, they've been on the other side of the equation, and so as a result, they can actually empathize with you a lot more, go a little slower. Maybe they don't exactly know what to teach or how to teach this information, but they're just being a language partner with you. That can be a really good asset. You do need native material. You do need native material that you can comprehend. So having a native English-speaking friend who's very patient and willing to sit down with you, absolutely, that is a valuable asset.
Another thing that's helpful with those individuals is that they've thought about English grammar in comparison to another language. And they know what it's like to deal with grammar that doesn't exactly cross over, or words that do not directly translate. They're already comfortable with that idea. They don't have this vague understanding that everybody has the same word for love and it means exactly the same thing in every single context. Okay, they don't have that. They've already broken through that myth. So it's very, very, very helpful to have somebody who's already struggled with a language before and has worked with that puzzle before.
The last one, which is actually kind of a tricky one, is a native English speaker who hasn't studied another language, but who is certified to teach English as a foreign language. This is a tricky person to actually learn from because while yes, they have the information in their brain in order to be able to communicate that to a student, if they don't have the empathy and understanding of how difficult the language is, a lot of times sometimes they can progress too fast and leave their student behind just because ideally the student will be able to understand that. But in reality, it's hard.
And it depends on the personality. Not all ESL teachers that haven't learned another language are like this. But they might have this pride of like, I know better than you do because I know the methodology. I know how the brain works with language. I know this. So you shut up and listen and do what I say. That's not very helpful. And so there's this lack of empathy there. There's this idea of it's my way or the highway. You got to do it my way. I know best. And there's just not as much room for other people. Now, that comes with a certain personality type, a person carrying pride. Okay, that's one of those things you got to be careful with. That certification is great, but it's not something that's going to make or break your ability to teach. So it's one of those things that maybe they have the resources, maybe they have a lot of great content, maybe a lot of what they say makes sense. But if they've never actually wrestled with it and they've never actually been there or felt like a language baby, felt like a fool, or felt illiterate in a different culture, in a different place, then they're not going to be able to understand necessarily where you are coming from. Not fully. They might intellectually understand it. But people who have been there teach differently. People who know what it's like to know what is going on, but not being able to express themselves fully, kind of like a child, they teach differently. And those are the kind of people that we find for us works best with us.
We want to take this one step further. If we were going to have to put a prioritized list down of who you maybe could work with to increase your language faster versus maybe perhaps a little bit slower or more difficult to work with, this list that we're about to give you goes from most helpful to least helpful in terms of language learning.
In our minds, here's how it goes. Native English speakers who have learned other languages before.
An English learner much further ahead of you from your own language.
Native English speakers who have not learned another language, but they are certified ESL teachers.
English speakers who are more advanced and from other languages.
Native English speakers who haven't learned other languages before.
English speakers around your level from other languages.
And English learners around your level from your own language. Now, there are a lot of factors that would change this up. There's personality, there's willingness and graciousness and empathy and the ability to understand. There's time. How much time does that person have to hang out with you and to converse with you? Like, there's a lot of factors that change this and that will reorder this list. We're just saying that if we had to put it out in a blank slate, left to complete generality and completely general terms, this is the way it's been for us, and this is what we see the most often.
If you find a great friend, if you find a great person who's willing to be with you and willing to work with you, stick with that person.
Yes.
That willingness to kind of help you and push you and pull you through language learning is far more valuable than a certification, than what was their first language. That willingness is extremely rare because language learning and just being a friend to a person is a huge chunk of your time. So if you have a friend like that, number one, say thank you because that person is a valuable asset in your life. But number two, stick with that person because that kind of person can grow your language extremely quickly if you're willing.
All right, guys, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.